Hello everyone, my name is Robert Pratten, I'm the CEO at Conducttr, and this video is for people who want to exercise remotely and who want to increase their crisis team experience and confidence during the lockdown. Now, COVID-19 has been devastating for many businesses and families, and we're all now forced to be remote working. But we can use this as an opportunity to make our exercises and training much more realistic. Remote working gives us an opportunity to reimagine what exercising and training actually looks like. Now, obviously, we're going to save money compared to the old days of travelling and staying in hotels. But more importantly, you're going to be able to deliver better training and exercises, and that means more capable incident and crisis teams. If you've been working in a company, or if you are working in a company that pays lip service to business continuity and crisis management, and for you or your company it's really just a tick box exercise to get through compliance every year, this video is not going to offer you anything. So probably now's a good time to turn off and go and do something more relevant to your business, like just kind of massaging the numbers to make sure that everyone looks great. But if you're committed to wanting high performing teams that actually step up in a crisis and take control rather than escalating unnecessarily or worse, putting the company at even greater risk, then this video is for you. So look, let's face it, right? In any crisis, it was always going to be unlikely that everyone was just going to be available and they'd all be sat in the same room. So now we've got the opportunity to rehearse as we would in real life with strained communication and collaboration, and just the fact that we're all distributed adds some realism straight off the bat. But the real opportunity is to do things differently. Maybe you've been running exercises using PowerPoint or with everyone in the same room, and then someone comes in with a tweet printed on a piece of paper, and they kind of go up to one of the players and go, "Oh, here's an angry tweet from a player." Let's face it, it's not realistic, no one's impressed, everyone is disengaged. I mean, that was something that took ages to mock up the assets, it took ages to change it again when the customer wanted it rewritten, and now you're just running around shuffling pieces of paper rather than focused on the training audience. So let's look at where we could be. We could have teams that are leaning forward into the exercise, solving problems, making decisions, collaborating in breakout rooms, responding to real-time events at a pace that suits their level of readiness. So I'm not saying that we have to force the training audience to run before they can walk, but we ought to be able to turn up the heat and turn it down again based on how well they're dealing with the situation. And we need to show them the consequences of their actions or their inactions, and that is going to give you the engagement that you need. Okay, to do all this properly, you ought to buy our crisis simulation software, and you knew I was going to say that coming into this video, so I hope you're not surprised. But I'm going to tell you how to make improvements without using Conducttr, even though you'll know that in your heart of hearts, to do any job properly, you need the right tools. So look, for anyone that says that they'd like to exercise on real systems, there is something to be said for that, which is why we can plug into live systems as well as working standalone. But you are taking a bigger risk, a risk that stuff gets sent outside the company, that it falls in the wrong hands, and that is only made worse when you're exercising remotely. And when you're on real systems, there is the possibility that people will get engaged in real work and they'll forget about the exercise. So let's look at the setup. Ahead of the exercise, you'll want to email everyone with the date and the schedule that's sort of expected of them. We're in lockdown and we're going to have to use video conferencing, and I would also say an instant messaging system so that you have two modes of communications. If you have to use the real systems instead of an isolated simulation environment like Conducttr, create some kind of dedicated instant messaging channels on Slack or Teams, whatever you're using. Make it clear what channels are to be used for breakout rooms for specific teams, create a back channel for the issues, and create a general exercise control channel. Do the same with your video communications, with your video conferencing. In the invitation email, send out the video conference details to the main kind of assembly conference and refer to that conference room as the lobby, so that we make it clear that this isn't the exercise yet. This is the safe space that you can return to if you lose your way during the exercise. As the exercise unfolds, your training audience is going to need to leave that lobby and join different breakout rooms so that they can talk, collaborate, work on a decision, work on some content. Explain the protocol up front and possibly time those meetings. Now, in Conducttr we have a Zoom integration which allows anyone to set up the right permissions, but you can always use the facilities that you've got with your conferencing. Just a top tip, I would say, if you're using Zoom breakout rooms, players can kind of find it a bit annoying and a bit confusing if you just yank them from one breakout room to another. So we would tend to schedule the sessions, and also we give the power to the player, so the onus is on them to attend that meeting with a stakeholder or with the reporter. Now, we can send them notifications, but it just depends on the training objectives. And on that point, actually, while everyone's stuck at home, this is a great opportunity to get some really good subject matter experts, because if you want an ex-health minister or an ex-ambassador, previously you might have wanted to try and drag them to a location. It's just a bit of a nuisance for them. But now they're probably stuck at home. It's a good opportunity to get them into the exercise and really raise the production values. Another advantage of working remotely is information asymmetry. Information asymmetry is when different people get different information. So finance might get a sort of a loan report from the bank, communications might get information from the PR agency. And if you were doing this in real life, like in a room, you would have to run in with a piece of paper or hand it over, and everybody knows who's getting the special content. Doing it remotely, you can use direct messaging on the instant messaging channels and just drop that content to specific players, and then you can see if they really are collaborating and communicating as you expect. When people test products, whether it's software or roller coasters, they don't test it just to check that it works. They test that it doesn't fail. And nobody would expect to take a product into the real world without it being tested to breaking point, actually, before, because they want everybody to be safe, and it should be the same with your crisis team. I mean, just knowing what the procedures are and where the handbook is doesn't mean that they're going to be great in a crisis, because we're not testing the experiential side. So, it's great that you've got the handbook, even though it might be out of date at the moment there's a crisis. We want to develop people's attitude, their aptitude. We want to develop internal relations between colleagues. We want them to build in their memory through experience. And all of that can only be done with realistic exercises. And drawing another parallel with product testing, and this time with software, nobody would test their software on a live production system. They would always do it in a development environment. And this would be why Ford and other car companies would test their production cars on specific or specialised test tracks. They're not just going to take it out on the motorway. This is why you should be thinking about having a realistic, safe to fail environment, so that teams can rehearse and they're not going to do any unexpected damage either to themselves or to the business. So look, I'm not saying to expect failure, but if you're working in an organisation where everyone's afraid to make mistakes, you've got bigger issues than just the exercise environment. Because if you're in that situation, when a crisis hits, the institutional fear of putting a foot wrong is going to seriously impact your sense making, your decision making, and your time to action. So it's the stress of not working in that supportive environment is going to multiply the stress of the incident. Again, this is where a dedicated simulation environment comes in, because not only can you exercise as people would in real life, but they're not going to do any damage. It's a safe to fail environment. And just one final benefit is, particularly while everyone is working remotely now, a dedicated environment is going to give you eyes on everyone's activity, so you know that players are responding, how they're responding, and if they're responding well. Okay, let's look at engagement. If you're used to training with PowerPoint, like in a physical room with everyone sat around, and now you're sort of moving that PowerPoint onto a webinar, you're not going to need me to tell you that engagement is plummeting through the floor, because if it was bad before, it's going to be even worse now when you're doing it remotely. So how do we maintain engagement? Well, any exercise has three sort of principal pillars. That is the scenario, it's got to be relevant, problem solving, so we want the participants to be active, and the senses. We should be doing more than just getting people to read stuff. We want to involve touch, sight and sound, like video, phone calls, images. If you are able to get a red team, and that's a team that's dedicated to thwarting the training audience's ambitions, you're going to have engagement in bucket loads because people are active, they're forced to respond, and all of this you can do online, and I would arguably say it's even better online. On that point, about engagement, there are two things that people most often ask me, and that is about the length of the exercise and how to show the consequences of player action and inaction. So this is where remote exercising throws up some problems, but also some opportunities. As I mentioned, running a 2-hour sit-back PowerPoint is going to be worse than running it in person. So you might consider breaking that PowerPoint into chunks and spreading the 2 hours across a week. Book a series of meetings, and then on the first one you set up the incident, ask players how they'll respond, and allow them that duration of the meeting to actively problem solve, and don't be worried about ending with a conclusion. Then, in the time before the next meeting, you can look at what they've done, decide on how the scenario would have advanced, and when they come back, you can tell them the consequences, and you can spend the rest of that meeting, problem solving again, and you just repeat. I mean, I recognise that this could be more work for you, so it depends, how committed you are to wanting high-performing teams. I mean, are you prepared to just struggle on without using the right software? Because you do have a choice. And if anyone ever asks, what's the return on investment of crisis training and business continuity training, you can ask, well, how many times has a senior leader had to give up a day or half a day, God forbid a week, to get involved in a situation that could have been handled by somebody, to be quite frank, who costs a lot less? And it's not just the hands-on time for that senior leader, it's the opportunity cost that their attention is not focused on some other business matter. And all of that time is quantifiable, and it doesn't even bring into play the revenue impact of a badly handled crisis by a poorly trained team. So training and exercising shouldn't be put off until the lockdown is over. And we shouldn't be thinking, I'm going to wait till we go back into that room and I'm going to be running around with pieces of paper again, because you're missing out on an opportunity, one, to save the travel and accommodation costs, but also to create a realistic environment. I mean, in the lockdown, or at least working remotely, a one-day exercise could potentially work much better than a 2-hour exercise spread across the week, but you're still going to have to emphasise the participation. And probably, if you're not using the software, schedule your day into those sort of chunks. I mean, if you are using Conducttr, you won't need to have this sort of stop-start approach, because the environment will be constantly changing. And even though you're going through the same loop, this kind of observe, decide, act, show the consequences, back again to observe, the seams are going to be welded together so that the training audience never sees the join. Just to conclude then, on the consequences at least, People often assume that scenarios have to branch, but that's not strictly true. And the way to think about that is if you've got 3 passengers on a train from London to Manchester. Now, they're all going on the same journey, they're all going to stop at the same stop, but they could be in different carriages. So you've got one person in first, another in economy, and another one in economy with a lot of drunk sort of football fans. So that train journey is really your master events list, but the experience that each person gets is completely unique based on the choices that they made, and you can change that by changing the story world, the atmosphere, the environment around the master events list to communicate the actions or inactions, and this gives you the training objective kind of ticks while still making it very engaging and immersive. So look, I wanted to keep this brief, and I hope I've given you some ideas for seeing the lockdown and this sort of forced remote working as an opportunity to move to more realistic exercises. Look, there's a reason why pilots spend thousands of hours in flight simulators. It's to build up their experience under different weather conditions, different situations and so on. If you're committed to high-performing teams, running remote exercises isn't something you should worry about. It's a chance to embrace and make a change for the better